He admitted he treated every crisis like a legal case. Find the evidence, control the facts, win the argument. He had believed solving the problem was the same as protecting me. But emotions aren't a courtroom. Some pain can't wait until every fact has been collected. I returned the engagement ring. I didn't say we were over forever. I simply said I couldn't keep planning a wedding. That was the first time I walked away from someone I still loved. I used to believe people only left when love was gone. Sometimes you leave because the love is still there, and you don't want it to keep hurting you in the same way. Soon afterward, my father called a family meeting. He didn't apologize. He only wanted to know whether the scandal would damage the company. Madison insisted she hadn't edited the video. My mother asked me not to take legal action because negative publicity could damage Madison's career. Once again, her future had to be protected. Mine could apparently be repaired later. I placed a folder on the table. Inside were the original sketches from the competition I had entered at 19. The paper, email records, and file dates all proved the collection had been mine. I told my father the competition organizers were reopening the case. If they confirmed the theft, Madison's award could be revoked. My father accused me of trying to destroy the family brand. I asked him one question. When you erased my name from those designs, did you worry about destroying me? No one answered. I stood up and left. A few days later, I publicly revealed that I was Vesper Lane. I posted a short letter on my website. Keeping my identity private once protected my work, but hiding became a habit. Starting today, I will no longer surrender my name to anyone. The news spread quickly. The board of Collins and Rowe learned that the patented clasp used in several of their best-selling collections belonged to me. For years, my father had licensed it through a third party. He had no idea the patent holder was his own daughter. The license was due to expire in 2 months. Without a new agreement, 3 upcoming collections would have to be pulled from production. For the first time, my father came to my studio voluntarily. He didn't come to talk about our relationship. He wanted me to renew the license in exchange. He offered me a position as deputy director of design. He described it as a generous opportunity. I almost laughed. Even then, he believed allowing me to put my name on something I had created was a favor. I refused to renew the license, but I gave the company 60 days to stop production and allowed existing orders to be completed. I didn't want ordinary employees to lose their jobs because of my father. He mistook restraint for weakness. He and Madison announced a new bridal collection called the Eternal Bride. It would debut during New York Jewelry Week with Madison as the new creative director. The first promotional image appeared a few weeks later. I recognized every design. They came from sketches I had created after leaving the family company. One piece was a delicate crown designed to match my unfinished wedding gown. Madison hadn't just copied the dress. She had taken an old sketchbook I once stored in my mother's safe. This time I didn't confront anyone. I called my attorney. Every design had been registered years earlier under the name Vesper Lane. I waited until the night Madison believed she had finally won. At New York Jewelry Week, she walked onto the stage wearing the sapphire ring and the white gown based on my design. Behind her, 12 pieces from the Eternal Bride appeared on a giant screen. My father sat in the front row looking prouder than I had ever seen him. Madison began explaining the inspiration behind each piece. She said the leaf-shaped crown represented family roots. She said the pearl necklace symbolized the unbreakable bond between sisters. I almost laughed. Just before the collection went on sale, the organizers paused the presentation. Several attorneys and copyright officials walked onto the stage. The screen changed. On the left were Madison's pieces. On the right were my original sketches, digital records, and copyright registrations. The designs were nearly identical. Madison turned pale. She claimed the work belonged to Collins and Rowe because I had created it in the family workshop. My attorney presented records showing that the pieces were created after I left. I had purchased the materials. The copyrights belonged to me. There was another problem. A preservation powder used inside my mother's safe had been found between the pages of my missing sketchbook. Further testing could prove where the book had been stored. My father tried to stop the live stream. The organizers refused. They could also be held responsible for selling stolen work. Madison looked at me. "Why would you humiliate me in front of everyone?" she asked. I walked onto the stage and picked up the microphone. I explained that Collins and Rowe had been founded to honor designers and craftspeople, but for the last decade, the company had used one daughter's silence to build another daughter's success. "I'm not here to destroy the company," I said. But I will no longer allow anyone to profit from work they stole from me. Several brands suspended their partnerships with Madison. The board opened an investigation into my father. Madison was removed as creative director. Backstage, my mother stopped me. "You already have money and recognition," she said. "Why do you have to take away the only thing your sister has?" In that moment, I finally understood her. Whenever Madison wanted something, my mother began describing it as the only thing Madison had. It didn't matter who it belonged to first, because I was considered strong. I was always expected to survive without it. "I'm not taking anything from her," I said. "I'm finally refusing to let her take what belongs to me." Collins and Rowe began falling apart after the launch. The collection was cancelled. Business partners demanded refunds. The bank reevaluated the company's loans. The board removed my father as chief executive. A few months later, the company prepared to sell its workshop and other assets. People assumed I would buy the entire business. I didn't. I purchased only the original workshop my grandfather had founded, the equipment, and the contracts of 26 craftspeople who wanted to stay. My father could keep the Collins name. I already had a name of my own. I renamed the workshop Second Light Studio. When I was 19, my stolen collection had been called Second Life. Back then, I wanted to rescue discarded jewelry. Now I wanted to give a second chance to people whose work had been taken from them. The studio created a legal assistance program for young designers dealing with copyright theft. I also established a scholarship for students without family support. I expected to feel completely free. It didn't happen that way. I still thought about my parents, and I still thought about Nolan. After our engagement ended, he didn't send flowers or pressure me to forgive him. He transferred every legal document to a new attorney and removed himself from my cases. He said that as long as he remained my lawyer, I might never know whether I kept him close because I needed his help or because I still loved him. He began teaching free legal workshops at Second Light. During those classes, he never tried to get close to me. He arrived early, organized the materials, taught, and left. One young designer came to us after her former employer stole an entire collection. Nolan helped her fight the case for 6 months. After she won, she told me something that stayed with me. When I was panicking, Nolan didn't tell me to wait for evidence. He told me first that none of this was my fault. Then he started working. I knew he was changing. But the truth was, I still felt calmer whenever he entered a room. I started wondering whether leaving him had been about protecting myself or punishing him for not protecting me perfectly. Maybe it had been both. 6 months later, Nolan came to the workshop and returned my engagement ring. He didn't propose again. He said the diamond belonged to my grandmother and the design belonged to me. Whatever happened between us, the ring shouldn't remain with him. I asked whether he regretted leaving the party. "I don't regret saving the footage," he said. "If it happened again, I would still protect the evidence." Then he took a breath. "But I wouldn't walk away without saying anything. I would stand beside you first. I would tell everyone I believed you. Then I would go." He finally understood that he could protect the facts without ignoring my feelings. I led him into the back room. The family sapphire ring was on the table. After the New York presentation, Madison returned it to our mother. My mother later sent it to me through an attorney. I hadn't kept it in its original form. I removed the sapphire, melted down the old metal, and used it to create 2 simple bands. For years, that ring represented my family deciding which daughter deserved it. I said, "I don't want it to represent obedience, comparison, or permission anymore." I placed one band in Nolan's hand. Now it only represents choice. I told him I couldn't pretend that night had never happened. But I also didn't want fear to make every decision for me. I didn't want to reject someone who was willing to learn how to love me better. This time I reached for his hand. Not because I had forgotten how much he disappointed me, but because he never asked me to forget. Real forgiveness doesn't mean deleting the part where someone hurt you. It means believing both people have learned enough not to create the same wound again. We didn't immediately plan another wedding. For several months, we simply dated again. We bought groceries, cooked dinner, and repaired a leaking faucet in my apartment. Nolan attended design exhibitions with me. I went to hear him speak at a law school. I used to believe love had to be proven through major moments, a proposal, a wedding, a dramatic public declaration. Eventually, I learned that the future of a relationship is decided in ordinary moments no one else sees. It's whether someone remembers that coffee makes you sick on an empty stomach. It's whether he listens after an argument instead of waiting for his turn to speak. It's whether, after hurting you, he wants quick forgiveness or real change. 1 year later, Nolan and I were married inside Second Light Studio. There was no luxury hotel and no huge guest list. We invited our closest friends, the craftspeople from the workshop, and the clients who had truly supported us. I didn't invite my parents or Madison. Someone asked whether I would regret it. I said a wedding isn't meant to prove that you have forgiven everyone who ever hurt you. It is simply the beginning of a life two people have chosen to build together. Before the ceremony, I spent a few minutes alone in the workshop. My grandfather's magnifying glass was still on the workbench. I thought about the scholarship I lost at 19. I thought about the lights going out at my engagement party. I remembered how alone I felt when the elevator doors closed behind Nolan. I also remembered the first time I signed a design as Vesper Lane. Back then, I believed hiding was the only way to protect myself. Now I understood that real protection didn't mean remaining invisible. It meant refusing to surrender my identity, no matter how other people tried to define me. When the music began, I walked out of the workshop alone. Halfway down the aisle, Nolan held out his hand. This time, he didn't wait for me to walk the entire distance by myself. He came toward me. We walked the rest of the way side by side. Our wedding bands had been made from the same old family ring, but they no longer represented my family's approval. They represented two imperfect people who understood that love came with a price and still chose to love each other with care. 3 months after the wedding, I received a letter from Madison. She admitted that she had always been afraid of me, not because I had hurt her. She was afraid because she knew that many of the things she received had originally belonged to me. The more our parents praised her, the more frightened she became that someone would discover the truth. So she kept taking more. She believed that as long as I continued to fail, her life would look successful. I didn't answer the letter, at least not then. An apology can be the beginning of change. It is not an automatic ticket back into someone's life. Maybe one day Madison and I will talk. Maybe we never will. I no longer force every relationship to have a happy ending, because my life already has one. I used to believe growth meant making the people who hurt me pay for what they had done. Eventually, I understood that real growth means refusing to let that pain keep making your choices. My parents favoring Madison didn't prove I was unworthy of love. Madison stealing my work couldn't turn her into me. The fake video damaged my reputation, but it also forced me to stop hiding my real name. Nolan leaving when I needed him showed me that love isn't only about trust. Love also requires presence, communication, and accountability, and leaving him taught me that boundaries aren't always meant to keep people out forever. Sometimes they teach the people who respect you how to come closer. Some families treat love like a prize. They make you compete for it. They ask you to stay quiet, endure more, and sacrifice yourself. Then they promise that maybe, if you become easier to manage, they will finally choose you. But healthy love never requires you to disappear. It doesn't erase your name and then tell you that family members shouldn't care about credit. It doesn't wait until you become successful before recognizing your value. It took me years to understand something simple. Love isn't about who says the most beautiful things when everyone is watching. It's about who still sees the real you after the lights go out. For most of my life, I treated everything as something I had to prove. I wanted to prove I was more talented than Madison. I wanted to prove my parents had been wrong. I wanted to prove I could succeed without them, but after I found success, love, and a life of my own, I realized the most important proof was never meant for them. It was for the 19-year-old girl who lost her collection and her scholarship. I wanted her to know they had stolen one opportunity. They had not stolen her talent, they had not stolen her future, and they had never taken away her right to be loved. So when someone tries to convince you that you must abandon yourself to keep a relationship, remember this. Someone who truly loves you will never ask you to dim your light just to protect their ego. An opportunity that belongs to you doesn't disappear forever simply because someone steals it once. Sometimes life takes away a ring, an engagement, or even the family you spent years trying to please. That doesn't mean your story is over. Maybe life is only forcing you to release the identity other people created for you so you can begin again, under your own name. At my engagement party, my younger sister walked into the ballroom wearing a white dress. It looked almost identical to the wedding gown I had designed for myself. Before I could ask how she had gotten the design, she picked up a remote and shut off the lights. A security video appeared on the screen behind us. In the footage, I walked into a married man's hotel suite. Later, he hugged me and placed a jewelry box in my hands. The video froze on the embrace. The entire ballroom went silent. My mother stood first. She didn't ask whether the video was real. She didn't give me a chance to explain. In front of more than 70 guests, she pulled our family's sapphire ring off my finger and placed it on my sister's hand. "This heirloom doesn't belong to a woman who can't stay faithful," she said. I looked at my fiancé, Nolan. I thought he would come stand beside me. Instead, he stared at the time code in the corner of the screen, grabbed his coat, and walked out. Everyone believed he had chosen to believe the video. So did I. That night, I lost my engagement, my family, and my reputation all at once. 3 months later, my sister stood onstage at the biggest jewelry launch in New York, wearing that same sapphire ring and calling herself the new creative director of our family company. She had no idea that every piece in her collection had been designed by me years earlier. And she definitely didn't know that the anonymous designer who could destroy everything she had built was me. My name is Avery Collins. I'm 31 years old, and my family has owned a jewelry company in Boston for more than 60 years. Collins and Rowe began in a tiny workshop, founded by my grandparents. My grandfather made every piece by hand, and my grandmother drew the designs. When I was a child, that workshop was my favorite place in the world. Other kids drew houses and smiling suns. I drew rings, necklaces, and brooches. When I was 12, I restored a Victorian brooch by myself for the first time. My grandfather examined it under his magnifying glass, then handed the glass to me. "You notice what other people miss," he said. "Never lose that." After he died, my father, George, took over the company. That was when everything changed. My father believed craftsmanship was too slow. According to him, modern luxury was about branding, celebrity endorsements, and social media. My younger sister, Madison, fit perfectly into that vision. She was 4 years younger than me, beautiful, charming, and completely comfortable in front of a camera. By 16, she already had a large following. My parents began presenting her as the young heiress of the Collins jewelry legacy. I stayed in the workshop. I drew the designs, selected the stones, adjusted the proportions, and repaired anything that didn't sit correctly. Madison wore the finished jewelry in photographs. Whenever those photographs appeared online, everyone praised her talent. Once, a magazine editor asked what had inspired a pearl necklace she was wearing. Madison glanced at me, then smiled into the camera. "I dreamed about moonlight falling across the ocean," she said. The truth was that I had designed that necklace for our grandmother. During the last months of her life, Grandma had looked through a hospital window and told me the moon resembled a pearl floating on a dark sea. I turned those words into a necklace. But Madison became the visionary. I remained the sister who adjusted the clasp. Whenever I complained, my parents said the same thing. "We're family. Why does it matter who gets the credit?" Somehow, the person being asked to sacrifice was always me. When I was 19, I entered an international competition for young jewelry designers. The winner would receive a full scholarship to study in Italy. I spent 8 months preparing 6 pieces made from damaged and discarded jewelry. I called the collection Second Life. The idea was that something other people considered worthless could still become beautiful again. 2 days before the deadline, my father offered to arrange professional photographs. I trusted him and gave him my sketches, finished pieces, and written explanation. 3 weeks later, the results were announced. My name wasn't on the finalist list. Madison's was. She had entered my entire collection under her own name. Every sketch carried her signature. Even the description was mine. She won first place when I confronted my father. He told me Madison was better suited to represent the company. "She has an audience," he said. "She knows how to handle the press." I asked what would happen to my scholarship. He shrugged. "If the company succeeds, you'll benefit too." My mother begged me not to expose Madison. She said Madison was young, and if people learned the truth, her future would be destroyed. I asked, "What about my future?" My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I never forgot. "You're stronger than she is. Losing one opportunity won't hurt you as much." That was the day I learned that the stronger a child appears, the easier it becomes for a family to sacrifice her. Madison received the trophy, the interviews, and the brand deals. I lost the scholarship. 1 month later, I moved out and rented a small apartment near an antique jewelry store. I didn't expose what they had done because I had no evidence. My father had submitted every document, and the collection was already registered under the company's name. That was my first real lesson about adulthood. The truth doesn't always belong to the person who lived it. Sometimes it belongs to the person who filed the paperwork first. After that, I stopped giving my family access to my designs. I also stopped publishing anything under my real name. During the day, I restored antique jewelry. At night, I designed my own pieces under a professional alias Vesper Lane. No one knew who Vesper Lane was. Clients could only reach me through an attorney. My first major client was a retired actress. She brought me jewelry from 3 failed marriages and asked me to turn it into one necklace. "Those marriages ended," she said. "But that doesn't mean those years never existed. I placed 3 stones of different colors on the same chain. None of them occupied the center. Each remained separate, but together they formed something new." She wore the necklace on a film festival red carpet. After that, collectors and celebrities began searching for Vesper Lane. Over the next several years, I built a private design business. When I was 27, I patented an adjustable clasp for luxury necklaces. Several major brands licensed it. Soon, my annual income was larger than the total yearly profit of my father's company. My family had no idea to them. I was still someone who repaired old jewelry in a small shop. Madison once sent me a broken sample and said, "Not like you have a real brand of your own." I didn't correct her. Part of me wanted to protect my work from my family. Another part of me was still waiting for them to respect me without knowing I was successful. I wanted them to choose me simply because I was Avery. That was my mistake. I met Nolan Reed 4 years ago. A client brought a 19th century blue diamond brooch into the shop. The piece was worth nearly $3 million. The diamond was real, but the metal backing had recently been replaced. If I repaired it, I might destroy evidence connected to an inheritance dispute. The client's attorney came to the store the next morning. That attorney was Nolan. He wore a dark coat and carried a thick stack of documents. He looked serious enough to shut down the entire shop. He asked why I had stopped the restoration. "The soldering is less than 2 weeks old," I said. "It doesn't belong on a 19th century brooch." He studied my notes without questioning my judgment. Then he asked, "Would you be willing to explain this in court?" "I don't like courtrooms." "Neither do I," he said. "Unfortunately, I'm there almost every day." The brooch eventually returned to its rightful owner because of what I noticed. After the case ended, Nolan kept finding excuses to visit. Once, he brought in a vintage watch and said it was broken. There was nothing wrong with it. He simply didn't know how to change the date. I asked whether he had brought it in just to see me. For the first time, the serious attorney looked embarrassed. We had dinner that night. 6 months later, I told him I was Vesper Lane. I expected him to be shocked. Instead, he said he had known from the way I documented that first brooch that I couldn't be an ordinary repair specialist. "You look at jewelry like you're reading someone's past," he said. In our 3rd year together, Nolan proposed. He didn't buy an expensive designer ring. He brought me a small diamond my grandmother had left me and asked me to design the ring myself. "It should look like you," he said, "not like someone else's idea of who you're supposed to be." For the first time, I believed I could have a love that didn't require me to compete. Because of Nolan, I decided to give my family one more chance. I invited them to our engagement party. I thought that once they saw me happy, they might stop comparing me to Madison. I never realized that my happiness was the one thing Madison couldn't tolerate. We held the party at a historic hotel in Boston. When Madison heard about the engagement, she became unusually helpful. She offered to find a photographer. She also suggested that I wear our grandmother's sapphire ring. My mother had kept it locked in a safe for years. When we were children, she said it would go to whichever daughter married first. When Madison married, Mom suddenly said she wasn't ready to give it away. Now she wanted me to wear it. I knew the timing was strange, but I accepted. I wanted to believe it was a late sign of approval. Before the party began, Madison sent a dress box to my room. Inside was a white gown. The neckline, waist, and sleeves were almost identical to the wedding dress I had been designing on my computer. My design wasn't even finished, and I had never shown it to anyone. Madison called it a coincidence. Then she smiled and asked, "You're not going to fight me over a dress, are you?" When she entered the ballroom wearing it, several guests briefly assumed she was the bride-to-be. That wasn't an accident. She wanted everyone's attention, and the dress was only the beginning. Halfway through dinner, Madison announced that she had prepared a special family video. The lights went out. Instead of childhood photographs, security footage appeared on the screen. It showed me entering a hotel suite belonging to Victor Hall, a married real estate investor and one of my private clients. The footage had been edited to show me entering, Victor closing the door, and later hugging me. According to the edited timestamp, I had been alone with him for more than 2 hours, but Victor's wife had been in the room the entire time. So had her nurse and my assistant. Victor and his wife had asked me to turn a bracelet that belonged to their late daughter into an anniversary pendant. The hug came after Victor saw the finished design and broke down. It was the reaction of a grieving father. Madison turned it into an affair. When the video ended, she began to cry. She claimed it had come from an anonymous source and said she couldn't allow Nolan to marry me without knowing the truth. My mother accused me of humiliating the family. My father demanded to know what else I had been hiding. I tried to explain that the video had been edited. No one wanted to listen. Madison had also invited 2 entertainment bloggers. Within minutes, clips were online. I turned to Nolan. He stared at the time code in the corner of the video, then asked Madison for the original file. She claimed it came from an anonymous email address. Nolan picked up his phone and rushed out. I followed him into the hallway. "Do you believe that video?" I asked. "Don't contact anyone and don't delete anything," he said. "I need to verify something." Then he left. I watched the elevator doors close. At that moment, I didn't care whether he was searching for evidence. My entire family had turned against me, and my fiancé had not stayed beside me. My mother came into the hallway and pulled the sapphire ring off my finger. She said an unfaithful woman didn't deserve anything that represented commitment. Then she placed it on Madison's hand. It was too large, but Madison curled her fingers around it as though she had finally won. I picked up my coat and left the party alone. It was raining. I walked for more than 20 minutes in high heels. Under a bridge, I finally stopped and removed the engagement ring Nolan had given me. I didn't throw it away. I placed it inside my purse because I still loved him. I just didn't know whether love was supposed to feel that lonely. For the next 48 hours, Nolan barely contacted me. He sent one message saying he was searching for the original footage. He asked me to trust him, but trust isn't a switch someone can turn on by asking. The edited video spread online. Clients canceled appointments. People sent hateful messages to the store. My father released a statement saying my personal behavior had nothing to do with Collins and Rowe. He even announced that Madison would take over my restoration work. It was as though I had never belonged there. 2 days later, Nolan arrived with the complete video. It proved that 4 people had been in the suite the entire time. Login records connected the edited file to Madison's assistant. He also discovered that the bloggers had received invitations a week before the party. The evidence proved I had been set up. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt tired. "Why did you leave without saying anything?" I asked. He explained that the hotel was replacing its old security system. The original footage might have been deleted after midnight. If he hadn't acted immediately, we could have lost the evidence. Legally, his decision made sense, but I still told him the truth. "You proved I didn't betray you," I said, "but you didn't prove you would stand beside me when I needed you most. I never doubted you. That isn't the point. I didn't need an attorney in that ballroom. I needed my fiancé. Even if he had held my hand first and left 5 minutes later, it would have changed everything." Nolan didn't argue.